is a detail. The abandoned clothes were much too short in the arms and legs for the prisoner, and much too small to have been drawn on over a second suit, but clad in his underclothing only, it was just possible he could squeeze into them, and the less perfectly they fitted him, the better the disguise. And at the time he was stripped and examined in his cell, he had so many recent wounds that the only difficulty was to decide which of them his captors had not given him. The indictment before the grand jury was secured by evidence which, as the newspapers said, was so overwhelmingly convincing that murder in the first degree was the only charge permissible. The district attorney publicly complimented the police on their handling of the case, and declared that never before during his activity as public prosecutor had he known of a murderer who was not actually seen committing the crime being brought to the bar of justice with proof of guilt so thoroughly established and ably presented. In an interview with a representative of the press, he said: "Captain Brigstock's men have not only avenged the murder of their brother officer, they have demonstrated afresh the remarkable ability of the city's police force. It is no light matter to protect a city as large as ours, which in the very nature of things becomes a Mecca and Medina for criminals, and it is gratifying to know that our safety is looked after by so conscientious a band of officers." The patrolman ordered before the grand jury not only distinctly remembered seeing Slipher in the near neighborhood of the scene of the crime soon after it was committed, but they produced the weapon with which Hooper had been struck down, and showed the jury several rolls of bills taken from Slipher's pockets, which there was no doubt were part of the plunder he had secured in the safe robbery. Free to indulge his imagination as to how the struggle between Hooper and Slipher took place, the prosecuting attorney portrayed the villain discovered by the virtuous Hooper in the act of blowing open the safe, or in the act of endeavoring to escape, no matter which. The intellectual and wholly impatient jury, who had business of their own, which they were not attending to, saw in their mind's eye the prosecuting attorney's vivid picture, saw the villain Slipher blow open the safe, saw him make his escape, saw the devoted Hooper attempt to arrest him, saw the struggle, the blows, the gleam of the knife. Finally, they saw in private, with eyes not of the mind, Slipher's mishandled body. To add force to these specific arguments, Slipher's record, both as peterman and convict, was produced, and he was declared to be one of the most desperate offenders in the country. There was nothing for the intellectual and wholly impatient jury to do but indict him, and he was bound over till the next term of court. 2. Francis Peary and James Shell were two travelers of the underworld who had just returned from Europe to secure fresh letters of credit. They had made the fashionable grand tour of the continent, had blown themselves at the Monte Carlo crib, had seen wonderful things in forbidden Paris, and had come back to God's country to attend to business until their bank accounts should permit of another trip abroad. Shell had suggested while they were in Paris that they recoup their fortunes on the spot and avoid the seasickness and miscellaneous locomotion, but Peary's counsel had prevailed and they arrived in God's country about 3 weeks previous to the murder of Patrolman Hooper. "There's dough on this side, all right," Peary admitted, in reply to Shell's suggestion that they establish themselves in the French capital. "But it ain't our kind of dough. I've been rubbering around pretty strong since I've been on this side, and I'm next to how the money market stands over here. You remember that fellow from Vienna to borrow 100 from in Rome, and how he kept telling me to be sure and return it by the time I said I would? Well, he shows up the whole business. He was a nice enough bloke and had the rocks and all that, but he ain't the kind of bloke that lets you and me live and take trips abroad. When he figures up his accounts at the end of the year, everything must balance. He'll have a whole string of items just called 'men ain't made of wood,' but he knows where them contributions went, see? Well, it's the same all over Europe. They all got to know where and how their dough went, and who got it, and what they got it for. It'd kill 'em to figure up one of the columns in their account books and have to write after it,
Gone, and damn me if I know where. They got dough, but they ain't got no dough to lose without making a hell of a beef about it. See what they did with Bidwell when he made that Bank of England touch in the early '70s. Give him life? Why, them Englishmen thinks money is something sacred, holy, religious like. I gamble 1,000 that old bank could be touched up again for $1 million or two, but they'd hang the bloke that done it. It's not like that on the other side. Every year there's just so much dough lying around loose to be swiped, and if it ain't swiped, it's put down in the profit column. It's the same kind of dough that's looking for circulation in poker games. It wants to keep moving and changing hands, and guns is there to give it rope. See? It's a kind of providence.
And the copper's in there to make the guns trouble, retorted Shell. It's all right about the loose dough, but what about the loose fly cops? I'd rather take my chance with 10 of them rube coppers here in Paris than with one of their fly elbows in New York.
Everybody's a copper on this side, urged Peary. You remember that gun in Berlin trying to make a getaway after he picked the Maul's pocket and how the whole street sprinted after him? That's the way they do things on this side. The crowd is in sympathy with the copper and not with the gun. In the States, they give a gun a running chance and let the copper do the chasing. That's the way it ought to be.
The morning of the day following the murder of Patrolman Hooper, two men were in earnest conversation in a gaudily furnished room in an uptown hotel. One lay on the bed with a bandage around his head, and from the blood stains on the clothes it was evident that he was nursing a wound. The other sat at the bedside. The two were registered on the hotel's books as coming from Sydney, Australia, and had signed the names Richard Wamperson and Jackson Mather.
You put his light out all right,
the man at the bedside remarked.
They picked him up croaked.
Serves the ducker right, mumbled the invalid. Anybody been copped out yet?
The pipers say, just listen to my foreign education, that the police have pinched that Michigan bloke, Slifer. We done a bit with him in Cherry Hill 8 years back, remember? The bloke that made old Brigstock take that quick sneak out of his flat one day. They're going to railroad him for fair. The World says the police found the weapon on him and the Journal claims to had some of the bank's dough in his pockets.
Them newspapers is getting real wise. What a lot they do know. Seems like a gun can't do nothing anymore without being pinched for something else.
This comment was certainly ungrateful, the invalid not having been pinched of late for anything. More than that, it was unintelligent. The invalid did not understand the arrangement of things that makes imaginative news columns indispensable.
I'd sooner be pinched for what I didn't do than what I done. It riles a bloke's sense of justice to be accused false and helps him put up a front, declared the other. But you kicked in Paris about everybody being a copper in Europe and a gun having no chance. What do you call the newspapers in this country but coppers?
Fly ones, ain't they? They ain't copped out you and me. They're dead at the stiffs in the front office.
They say Slifer got away with the full 50,000 because they only found a few rolls on him. They're smart, they are. They think he's made a plant somewheres.
Shows you how dead they are. They know about as much who copped that coin as Slifer does. Of course, the police have got to put up a bluff, and they're glad to pinch anybody. But you'd think them papers might take a tumble to themselves once in a while.
Good for us that we wasn't mugged that time that old Freckleton got his glimpse on us 3 years ago, ain't it?
Longer than that. And besides, old Freck's croaked. He's the only man on the force who knew us.
Oh, I ain't leery, I ain't. But it's pie to take your constitutional without everybody rubbering. Say, I guess I take a bit of a leg loosener and see about banking that dough in London. That's where we need it in our business, and the sooner we get it there, the quicker. We want to mooch soon as we can stand for the ante.
All right. But don't be long I'm dead to the world up here alone. So long.
So long.
The night of the beginning of the 8th week after the murder of Patrolman Hooper, Francis Peary and James Shell were